On today's Locked On Nationals, we look ahead to the 2025 season and who has something to prove entering opening day. I'll tell you who that is after this.
You are Locked On Nationals, your daily Washington Nationals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thank you all for making Locked On Nationals your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can check me out over on Twitter. Just search up Locked On Nationals on Twitter. And of course, Ryan Clary 11, that is my personal page there. And that is where you'll find your daily coverage of the Nationals. And of course, look up Locked On Nationals wherever you get your pods, whether it's on Apple, Spotify, and of course, over on YouTube as well. And that is where you'll get the daily coverage of the Washington Nationals. Later on in today's program, we had to say goodbye to one of our good friends here over at Locked On Nationals, Pete Medhurst. He was the play-by-play guy for the Nationals at points. He filled in for Dave and Charlie Slows there. He also did pre- and post-game with them. So I worked with Pete for nearly 6 years over at 106.7 The Fan. So we'll discuss the life and the legacy of Pete Medhurst a little bit later on in today's program. And in the second segment, how can the Nationals attract more fans? And how can they get more butts in seats at Nationals Park? I've got some ideas that a team up north has just taken into effect here. So I want to discuss that a little bit later on. But who has something to prove in 2025? And I think there are a couple guys that have something to prove going into this season. And we'll start off discussing Jose Tana. But before we get into it, today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. So we get started discussing some Nationals baseball here today with who has something to prove entering 2025. And really the base of this conversation is who is like a young-ish kind of player, maybe coming off a good year, and who has, or a bad year for that matter also, and who has something to prove. Like, who's got to go into this season with kind of like their back against the wall, like the time is now. And the first one, in my opinion, is Jose Tana. Now, I think there are guys more deserving on this list, and we'll get into them a little bit later on in today's program. But I look at Jose Tana for this matter. He is going to be likely at this point your opening day third baseman. Jose Tana is someone who was once a pretty good prospect in the Cleveland Guardians system, went up through their rankings, made his debut just 2 years ago, and he has kind of been back and forth with AAA, and he has put up some really good numbers up in AAA for the Guardians. When he got traded from the Guardians to the Nats, he was someone who immediately got called up to the majors, played some really solid time up there at third base for the Nats in that hot corner, and he looked really good at times. But he also really struggled to end the year. And also a glaring hole that I just could not ignore was how bad he was defensively. Jose Tana, his back is against the wall entering 2025. Like, when I talk about him, he is going to be your opening day third baseman, but he does not have the longest leash. He does not have a leash of a Luis Garcia Jr. who's coming off a breakout campaign. He does not have the leash of even a Keet Ruiz, who's on right now, the biggest contract on this Nationals team. Jose Tana has Brady House right behind him, a prize prospect within this organization that we have been waiting for years at this point. He does not have like this mega long leash that is going to allow him to play 162 games this year. In all likelihood, he will probably at some point have to sit back on the bench and see how things go. And that's not all that crazy, by the way, because again, Brady House is a first round pick. He is someone that the Nationals have put a ton of resources in, and they expect him to make the jump to the majors in 2025. At least that's what we all think. If Jose Tana starts out hot, which by the way, is not that crazy, because this guy has put up good numbers in AAA over the last few seasons. He does have good metrics that really back up what he can do. But the matter of the fact is this: if Brady House starts out hot, and Jose Tana starts out a little bit cold, you might see that switch coming relatively quicker than what you might be thinking right now. Jose Tana is someone, in my opinion, who could be that breakout player in 2025. But he does not have that long of a leash. He has to prove himself within the first month of April. And I think there's a good chance that he could do that, by the way. So we'll see what Jose Tana has to prove entering the season, but he's not the only one, in my opinion. Another guy that I look for that we mentioned just a few minutes ago, Keet Ruiz. Someone who signed a pretty big extension with the Nationals just before the spring of 2023. Keet Ruiz is coming off by far and away his worst overall season as a Washington National. And Keet Ruiz, again, similar to Jose Tana, except even a little bit better as a prospect, was someone who was in the top 50 rankings when the Nationals traded for him back in 2021. He is one guy, in my opinion, who I am ready to set sail. I am ready to set him loose. I'm not that convinced that Keet Ruiz is the catcher of your future at this point. If he cannot prove it this year, and if you look at last year, by the way, yes, he had the flu that took him out for a couple weeks. He lost nearly 20 pounds within a few weeks, and you all noticed it. He did not have his power. His defense was really bad. But also, this is part of baseball. This is like the curse of playing every single day, but it's also the beauty of it. Because Keet Ruiz could start off hot, which he has not really done here over the last few seasons. But if he does, then this is going to bode well for him being the catcher of the future. Because the Nationals have him locked up until 2030. He is going to be here for quite some time. They're not going to buy him out at this point. But the thing is with him is he has to prove his worth. He does not have time to start off slow. He does not have time to play really bad defensively, which we have seen over the last few seasons. The time for improvement for Keet Ruiz is now. He is someone that, in my opinion, the first few months of this season, he is one guy that I'm really going to be locked in on. And I think a lot of Nationals fans should be, by the way. Because at one point in time, we were talking about him being a very good to solid defensive catcher. At least that's what we were thinking coming out of the prospect ranks. And the number two, we all knew that he had the ability to hit for power from both sides of the plate and also just being an overall good offensive player. He does not strike out a lot. Second, he does not really swing and miss as much as he probably should have, considering he's got a relatively good eye in the zone. But we've also seen a lot of inconsistencies with him. In my opinion, right behind Jose Tana, he's the guy who really has a lot to prove. And if it wasn't for his extension, he would be the guy in Jose Tana's shoes right now, in my opinion. You would be talking about Keet Ruiz potentially losing his job to who? I don't know at this point. Because there's really no one behind him that you can say, well, this guy's going to take his job. If Riley Adams starts off hot again, maybe it's him. If Drew Millis decides to hit the baseball, you already know he's better defensively than Adams and Ruiz as well. So if Drew Millis can hit, then he's going to be in the conversation. But with Keet Ruiz now, the frustrations are real surrounding him. You have to start off hot in order to keep this job here. It doesn't matter about your extension. The Nationals won't buy you out, but they certainly won't make you the everyday starting catcher. That, in my opinion, is one of the biggest storylines of 2025 right now. Can Keet Ruiz turn his season around? Can he finally, number one, stay healthy, and number two, be consistent? Because if you look at his months, it's jarring to look at. The second half of this season, he was much better. August and September, he looked really good. But also, if you look at the months in between, there were some months where he had like a 500 OPS. There was months where he was batting like 150. I mean, Keet Ruiz at points of last year was really bad. Really, really bad. Offensively speaking, and of course, defensively as well. Keet Ruiz is going to be one of those guys that you have to keep your eye on going into 2025. And last but not least, a free agent that we've just signed, Michael Soka. Someone who has torn his Achilles not once but twice over the last 5 years. Soroka at one point in time was an all-star for the Atlanta Braves, was looking to be a potential Cy Young winner, and a lot of people picked him to be the next ace of the Atlanta Braves staff, and it certainly looked like he would be that. But now sitting here, the Nationals, they have signed him to be a starter, even though what they saw last year with the Chicago White Sox, where he first started off, he was not a good starting pitcher. In fact, his numbers were even worse than what Patrick Corbin's were at points of last year. That is how bad of a starter that Michael Soroka was. But he ended the year strong with the White Sox. He went to the bullpen. He looked really good out of the pen, coming in that fireman situation where he's eating up 3 to 4 innings a game. That's what Michael Soroka did. Well, the Nationals are bringing him in now, and they're saying that he's going to be a starter for this organization. I'm telling you right now, I'm not 100% convinced that this will work out. So I think it's kind of not fair for me to just throw this out there and say, well, he's not going to be good. That's pretty easy to say. But he has something to prove. Like, this is someone, in my opinion, who probably has the shortest leash of any of these guys. I'm not convinced that at some point this season, you'll have an extension on the table for Michael Soroka. I'm not convinced of it. You've got a lot of young starting pitchers on this rotation. Who knows what the Nationals decide to go with? But Michael Soroka is probably going to feel the heat in pretty early on, if we're just being honest. So he's the third guy of this list that I think has a lot to prove entering 2025. And thank you all for making Locked On Nationals your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And as we get into it, I do want to talk about the Nationals and how they can get more fans in the stands. Now, I will say this, the Nationals don't necessarily have like an attendance issue, but it can never hurt to have more fans in the stands. And this has been something that I think really just should be the average consensus among all major league teams. And we saw a team just up north, aka the Baltimore Orioles, adopt this just yesterday. And we'll get into that after we tell you about our friends over at SelectQuote. And of course, in sports, having a winning strategy is everything. It's how the best teams make it to the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the Olympics. And the same goes for life. Having a strategy like life insurance from SelectQuote can protect your financial legacy and keep your family's future secure. SelectQuote makes it easy to find the perfect life insurance policy. As one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience, they've helped over 2 million customers find $700 billion in coverage since 1985. What sets SelectQuote apart is their personal touch. Unlike other brokers that offers one-size-fits-all policies, their licensed agents tailor coverage to fit your unique needs. And if you're in good health, you might even qualify for same-day coverage of up to $5 million. No medical exam is required, and it's more affordable than you'd think. You can get up to $1 million in coverage for as little as $20 a month. Get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/lockedon. Go to selectquote.com/lockedon today to get started. That's selectquote.com/lockedon. SelectQuote, they shop, you save. Thank you all for making Locked On Nationals your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Now, I do want to talk about this because I saw the Orioles have adopted a new strategy to get fans back into the park. And the Orioles, they actually have a lower attendance than the Washington Nationals, so I will say that. But a new recent trend that you have seen around baseball, around sports in general, has been lowering concession prices. The number one complaint, in my opinion, when it goes to sporting events is on top of all the ticket fees, which will not be getting cheaper, by the way, it is the concessions that absolutely kill you. If you are out there, if you're a parent that brings your kids to the game, let's say you have 4 people, you're going to eat dinner at the ballpark, you're going to get a hot dog, you're going to get a soda, and you're going to get a beer. That's nearly like $45 if you're just getting those 3 things. Now, on top of that, add a couple more people into it. You're nearly paying $200 per game on top of the ticket fees of wherever you are sitting. It's out of hand. It's completely out of control. Well, the Baltimore Orioles, they have done the route now of going cheaper with concessions, and I think this is going to help in a huge way for that Orioles fan base, and they need it, by the way. They have been beaten up over the years with the Angelos family. You now have David Rubenstein as your owner, and he is now doing what is right, in my opinion. For instance, let's say a hot dog at Nationals Park, I think it's like $10, $11. It's now $4 at Orioles games. You can get cinnamon pretzel bites with cream cheese icing for $4. Popcorn is $3.50. You have refillable soda cups. Again, refillable, $4. Bottled water, $4. Select beers, I'm sure it's like Miller Lite and Bud Light, whatever it is, $5. And a 12-ounce seltzer, $6. These are still high in prices, quote unquote, but it is much better, and you're nearly cutting it in half. This is how you get fans back in the ballpark. And again, the Nationals, they don't really have an attendance issue. The Nationals have been able to sell seats over the last few seasons. And James Wood and Dylan Cruz, Mackenzie Gore, Jake Irvin, all these young guys making their debuts and coming up and making an impact in the bigs, it's going to get butts in the seats. But also, the Nationals' disadvantage they have right now is that they are one of the most expensive concessions in all of baseball at this point, for whatever reason. So if we were to cut back on that, I think it would help, number one, the fans out there, and number two, it would just help make the experience better. Now, as someone who goes to a lot of Nationals games, who spends a lot of money on concessions there, of course I'm the one saying, let's do this. Sign me up for it now. But also, I think if the Lerner family were to really look around and see what their issues are, number one, the issue is you got to put money into this baseball team. That's number one. But number two, you got to look out for the fans. Arthur Blank did this with the Atlanta Falcons. We're going to cross streams here with different sports, but Arthur Blank has done this with the Atlanta Falcons, and one of my buddies was just at the Falcons game just a few weeks ago. The first thing that he said, outside of a thrilling Falcons win in Atlanta, the first thing that he said was the concessions were like, it cost me $15 to get popcorn, a beer, and then a hot dog on top of it as well. And you also get fries for like another $3. That fan experience is something that just makes you feel good. And it also, at this point in time, separates you from the pack. Because I do believe we are kind of trending in that direction where things are going to be a lot cheaper at stadiums. I do think a lot of owners will kind of realize at one point, like, this is a pretty good look. And also, it's not really hurting the bottom line all too much. Now, I don't know that to be for sure, but I think if it were me, if I'm in the stands watching the game, and let's say you have season tickets and you're there for all 81 home games, you're going to feel more likely to, number one, spend going to the games, eating dinner there, getting a couple hot dogs, getting fries, getting a beer. I have a feeling that you would just feel more open to spending that kind of money at a game. And also, it just puts your team in a better light. And that is what the Nationals need at this point. They have been dragged through the mud by the fans, the national media, the local media, myself, and maybe even you out there. This would be a good headline to kind of refresh the memory bank of the Lerner family at this point. You need some good wishes at this point to kind of help you. Because over the last few seasons, they have not put enough pennies in the piggy bank here in order to make us feel good about the current ownership group. In fact, they're probably the least popular ownership group in the sport right now. Everyone is clamoring for the Nationals and the Lerner family to sell the team. This would help a lot. And also, while we're at it, talking about generating money, sell the naming rights for the stadium. Just do it. Finally do it. Get someone on there, make some extra cash for it, because I don't want to hear the excuses anymore of, well, we're getting hurt by Masson. Well, sell your naming rights for the team, get a couple $1 million, whatever it could be, over the next few seasons into your wallet, and then we're cooking with gas again. That's just something that maybe, just maybe, they decide to do. But thank you all for making Locked On Nationals your first listen every single day, as we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And now I want to talk about one of our friends here at Locked On Nationals, Pete Medhurst. Again, Pete Medhurst unfortunately passed away from brain cancer just a few days ago. And Pete Medhurst was on this show. He was on the post game for your Nationals radio network. He was doing fill-ins for Nationals games, many different things. And I just want to share some thoughts about Pete Medhurst after we tell you about our friends over at Gametime. And of course, when we talk about Gametime, I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. And one of my favorite memories was attending a concert last year. The energy and excitement was unforgettable. Now Gametime has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, I was looking for tickets to upcoming Nationals games for opening day that's coming up in just about 2.5 months. Now it's using the new Gametime app. With Gametime Picks, I found amazing deals and could even see the view from my seat before buying. The super deal is particularly impressive, offering great seats at unbeatable prices. Plus, the app's all-in pricing view shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout, so you can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. I want to take some time here to remember one of our friends from Locked On Nationals, Pete Medhurst. And if you remember, Pete Medhurst, again, post-game guy for the Washington Nationals on 106.7 The Fan. He did some fill-in Nationals games as well when Charlie and or Dave would be on the road doing something else. Pete Medhurst would fill in. And I was just floored by the news yesterday when I found out that Pete Medhurst passed away with his battle of brain cancer. And knowing Pete and getting to work with him over 6+ years at 106.7 The Fan, Pete was one of the hardest working guys that you will ever meet. And a lot of times early on when I was working at 106.7 The Fan, Pete Medhurst would be the host that I would produce for. And Pete and I had a really good relationship early on and was someone that was just always a professional. And that is just one word that I think is overused in a lot of different cases. But in Pete, that is the way that you describe Pete. Pete was always professional, the hardest working guy I knew, and was just always loved and surrounded by family. And it's just really sad news to wake up with over the last few days here, because Pete Medhurst was not only a pillar in this Nationals community, but also in just the community as a whole. Like, you would talk to Pete and it would just be, there was no one busier than Pete Medhurst. Like, we would talk with him and I'd see Pete walking in a Nationals game and I'd be like, "What's up, Pete? Like, where have you been?" And he's like, "Oh, I just called a horse race at Rosecroft Racing. Tomorrow night, I'm calling the Navy volleyball game. Then behind that, I got a softball game at night." The guy just loved being in the community. And I think with Pete Medhurst, something that I will just remember so well was he was the first guy who kind of gave me that lead advice as a young guy in this community, and really just in this industry. It is a very hard industry to crack into, but someone like Pete Medhurst, for all the young people out there who are in this, I know many people out there who will say the same thing. He was the guy who was always in your corner, batting for you and just going to bat at any different stop of where he was. And getting to work with Pete over the last really 5-6 years, I mean, it was a treat. And waking up yesterday to hear the news that Pete Medhurst had passed away was really just sad. And of course, I'm thinking of his daughter and his 2 sons today, and as well as his family and friends that are closest with him. And Pete Medhurst, as far as the Nationals community goes, he will be missed. And it is just really sad news to wake up to. And we're going to remember Pete Medhurst for someone who was a family man, but also one of the hardest working men in the industry. So we will miss Pete Medhurst, but knowing Pete, he'd be excited for opening day in 2025. And I know for a fact that Pete Medhurst would be thrilled to watch what this Nationals team will be doing going forward. So pay my utmost respects to his family and his friends closest to him. But we love Pete, and I wanted to talk about that to end today's show. So we'll catch you guys on the flip side. Have a good one. Go Nats.